if you've ever wrestled with sexual sin, with lust, with all of these feelings, and you truly just don't know how to overcome that temptation and sin cycle. I have a guest to join me to talk about all things freedom today. Hello, ladies and gents, and welcome to this week's episode of the Bought and Beloved podcast. As always, it's your girl, Kirby Kelly, and we are in a series right now, a series all about the book that I wrote. It's called You Can Be Free, Overcoming Temptation and Habitual Sin by the Power and Promises of the Gospel. I get raw and real in this book about things that I have walked through, how the Lord has brought me freedom, deliverance, and has truly just taken things that I've walked through that I never knew I could get free from, and now can just champion it and say, hey, like, look what God can do. If he did it for me, he can do it for you. And one thing that I talk about in the book, when you get it, you'll get to read my story in full, is how lust was an area of my life where I really struggled, where I felt very defeated and didn't really have a lot of hope that I would be free. But I'm going to talk about this with one of my amazing friends, a good guest of mine, named Jeanine Amapola. She has also walked through this and seen freedom and victory in this. And so we're going to have a little conversation about that today. But Jeanine, how are you doing?
I'm good, Kirby. Thanks for having me back on the podcast. This is so fun.
Literally, you were just on like a few weeks ago. So to have you back on again, I'm so excited. The first episode was so good. So I'm excited to see what this conversation holds.
Well, now we get to talk about your book and your story, which is so exciting. I mean, honestly, even just hearing the subtitle of your book, I'm like, yes, I would pick that off of a bookshelf, because I think so many people are struggling with that. And I'm really excited to dive into this topic. I think it's really going to help a lot of people.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And y'all can pre-order it. It's available June 11th, but you can pre-order now and get like a million bonuses of freebies on my website. I'll link it below. But let's just dive right in. Let me know. Let's start by maybe talking about what did it look like for you? Like, how did you end up struggling with lust and pornography and all of these things? Like, what did that look like entering into that sin and struggling with that sin for you?
Yeah. So, okay, we're going to get a little raw and honest here. If there's young listeners,
girl, that's okay.
Plug your ears. No, this is good because we want people to find freedom. And so I would say, oddly enough, at a young age, I always struggled with this. And I didn't even know how to pinpoint what it was, why it was. I didn't know what these desires were. And so I'd always say that lust was something I struggled with from a very young age. I mean, even watching like TV shows from when my older siblings were watching certain shows, and there would be these like weird, sex scenes and stuff. I remember feeling things in my body and I was like, this is so weird. Like, I don't even know what they're doing, and I am for some reason feeling things. And I was so young that I didn't know how to pinpoint what that was. But I mean, as I got older, I look back and I'm like, oh, I was already struggling with lustful desires at a very young age. And I do think it is something that can be passed down generationally. It could be a certain thing that's in your culture or that's in a generational thing. And I do think that was something that was a struggle in my family. And so that was what I mainly struggled with, was this like lust and like wanting to know more, even though I never saw anything because it was always like PG stuff. But then one day I got fully exposed to it, not by my choice. I was at a hotel with my childhood best friend and my two sisters, and my best friend's parents were at this conference. And so they would bring us along and we would just like enjoy all the benefits of the hotel. We would, use the hot tub and the pickleball courts or badminton, stuff like that. And so one night we were just in our hotel room and we're flipping through the channels. We were out of movies to watch on our DVDs that we brought. And we're just flipping through and HBO just pops up on the TV, and full on pornography was just on the TV. I mean, a full on scene. And I remember sitting there like literally like, oh my, like, do I look away? What is going on? Like, I was so caught off guard by what I had seen, and I just didn't know like how to wrap my head around it. I think I was only like 10 years old, 10 or 12, like pretty young. And unfortunately, my parents never gave me the sex talk. They never gave me the birds and bees conversation. And so I didn't even know how to rationalize what was going on. And so we immediately clicked off the TV and we all like paused and we were like, what was that? And we're so
Yeah.
young. And so we were like laughing. We didn't know, like, okay, is that bad to watch? Is this normal? Like, I think we were all so young that we weren't able to fully process, like, that's bad, not okay. And I
Hmm.
remember asking my friend, being like, what was that? And she's like, that's how babies are made. And I was like, literally
Mind
repulsed,
blown.
like, mind blown, like,
Yeah.
that's what they do when a baby is born. I was freaking out because my parents never told me, and I wish they
Oh yeah.
did. And so from that, I mean, literally, it took one scene. It was maybe like 10 seconds of my life where the enemy opened a door and planted this seed of lust and temptation and pornography, and it led to masturbation. And so I began to become very curious and was like, what is this? I want to know more. I know this is bad potentially, but I want to know more. And so I began to like Google these websites and become curious. And I didn't talk to anyone about it. It was like this weird thing where my siblings and we never talked about it really again. We were just like, okay, that's bad.
Hmm.
But no one processed with us what had happened and why it was bad and what's going on. And so it began to be this habitual sin in my life that lingered up until I'd say, for the next 4 or 5 years until I finally found freedom from it. But for the next like 4 or 5 years, I began to continually watch it and just live in such shame. And it manifested later
Hmm.
into temptation with men and wanting to be desired and just craving some sort of intimacy with somebody in all the wrong ways. And so I'll stop there, but I would say that's where it basically started.
It's so interesting because I feel like, and we can talk about this in a moment too, just about how, like, especially as women, I feel like there's an even like greater level of shame that can come with it. Because for so many people, like in our culture, or even just like in the church, it's like, well, that's a boy's sin. And it's like, yeah, shame on you, boys. But like, for girls, I was exposed to it at a very young age as well. The first time I was exposed to it, and I talk about it in my book, I was 4 years old. And
Wow.
again, it was not by my choice. I just walked in on somebody watching it and I saw everything, like, saw everything. And I was kind of in the same way, just like curious, but also so like confused. And I was like, I just knew deep down, like, I don't think I'm supposed to be seeing this, but like, what is this? And there was like that intrigue and interest. And then when I was like, I don't know, maybe like 7 years old, I was exposed to it again, and not willingly either. I was exposed
Wow.
to it again, and it was like, "Well, what is this?" Like, again, I feel like I recognize kind of like what this is. This reminds me of when I walked in on it and I saw it this first time. And then again when I was 10 years old, it just like it just kept happening, kept reoccurring, where I was at a sleepover at a friend's house from school, and she was like, "Let me show you this website that my brother showed me." And now
Oh
that I think about it, I'm like,
my.
why did her brother show her this? Like, I
What?
really hope that she was able to work through that. But I remember she showed it, and it was like me and like two other girls, and we were just like, what is this? Like, kind of went down the rabbit hole of curiosity, unfortunately. And I'll never forget, like, deep down, I knew that it was wrong, that I shouldn't have been watching it. Like, there was this like secrecy to it. Like, there was just something odd about it. And I remember going to school on Monday and then being like, Kirby watches porn. I was in
No.
fifth grade. I was in fifth grade. And I was like, no, like, I didn't look it up. Like, I was trying to defend myself. And it was so interesting how, like, not only was there shame and secrecy, but then, like, even when it was exposed like that, there was just this other level of like disgust and self-hatred and all these things. And going into middle school, going into high school, it was something that I also struggled with, which was interesting because I gave my life to Jesus when I was 14 and asked for like a purity ring for Christmas. And it's like, little did anybody know that the purity girl had a porn addiction, right? Like, it was so secret and it was so destructive. And it really affected my view of self, my view of relationships. Like, I wanted to be pure, but I was still struggling
Mhm.
with this sin. It wouldn't go away, like, no matter how bad I wanted it to. And so let's dive into that next. Like, at what point did you maybe realize, like, hey, this is a problem in my life. I want to get free from it. And what did that look like? Was it something that just instantly went away? Like all the lust, all the sexual temptation,
Mhm.
all the, seeing everything online. Did it just go away instantly, or was this something that you had to work through and find freedom from, like in all these different avenues where sexual sin was in your life?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. My story is very similar. It's the same thing. I mean, wanting, because I grew up a Christian and knew it was wrong. It's like funny how the Lord plants it in you where He's like, hey, this is wrong. And you're able to
Mhm.
discern that at a very young age. But once you've been exposed, it's like the enemy just has a field day with it. And so,
Literally.
same thing for me. I knew it was bad every time I would look at it. I would be like, oh, like, okay, I'm not going to go back. I'm not going to go back. And I would literally, because I thought in my young brain that if I watched it, I was going to go to hell. So I would literally say the salvation prayer every single time. I'm like, God, please, I repent. I invite you back into my heart. And like, please forgive me. Please, I want to go to heaven. Because I thought like the Lord would just like send me straight to hell because of it. And so I just
Mhm.
had a wrong view of God and of salvation. And so truly, yeah, for a long time, I just struggled. I would go periods where I would not watch it. And then one day that thought would come back and I would be like, okay, it's not that bad. And I would convince myself it wasn't that bad. And so this went on for a really long time, just constant tug of war tension between,
Mhm.
right versus wrong. And finally, and it's funny, you said you got saved when you were 14. I would say that's really when I had my first true encounter with Jesus was around 14 as well. And I remember I was at this Christian camp called Youth for the Nations at Christ for the Nations. And they
Mhm.
had this one service, and it's a very spirit filled like service. And it was about like day 3 of the camp. And the pastor on the stage is basically like, hey, I want to open up the floor. If any of you guys here have been struggling with something that's been holding you back, a secret you've been carrying, something that you just been carrying for way too long, this is your chance. Like, this is your time. I want you to find freedom. I want you to come forward. And it's like the classic situation when your palms start sweating. You're like looking around. You're like, is anyone going to go? Like,
Anybody else?
yeah, I'm like, am I alone? My heart is like thumping. I'm sweating. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, okay. And I just knew, I'm like, God's calling me. Like, I have got to let this go. And I finally just was like, okay, you know what? I don't care what anyone thinks. I just like ran down on the
Mhm.
front and I just confessed everything. And I told this like leader, I'm bawling my eyes out. I mean, snot bubbles, like the whole 9 yards, just
Mhm.
like bawling my eyes out. And I confessed, and I kid you not, from that day forward, I never looked at pornography again. I mean, the Lord
Wow.
literally broke it from me. Now, I would say masturbation was more of a struggle from there. The pornography, I was just done. I was so sick of it, hated the way it made me feel. But I would say masturbation was more an accountability process where I would
Mhm.
confess it. I'd have people hold me accountable, and that's what helped me find freedom. Was the people and me just being honest. But from that day forward, honestly, thank the Lord, He took that addiction from me that day.
Wow. That's amazing, especially like at such a young age to find like freedom from that specific sin, because like that age, I mean, we all went through puberty. So it's like you got
Mhm.
all the hormones raging, and it's like one to even just like stop viewing porn, like cutting it cold turkey. That's amazing, because for me, it was not that easy. Like, gave
Mm.
my life to Jesus. Some other sins, it was like so easily they fell off. Like I struggled with suicidal thoughts and self-harm and depression. Like I did not want to be alive. All the meanwhile, I was struggling with this thing. And when I gave my life to Jesus, which is so funny, we have such a similar
We
testimony, Janine, because
do, yeah.
it was like Wednesday night, and it was like the it wasn't like the Friday night boohoo fest when like everybody's like, you have the guitar and it's
Yeah.
like, give your life to the Lord before you go home. Like it
Yeah,
was just
no.
Wednesday night worship. Um, but that was a sin that like I wasn't instantly delivered from. Like it really took some time and sanctification. And sanctification is just like fancy church word for the Lord like perfecting you daily to
Yeah.
look more like him. Like I think that the enemy, especially like in my life in that area, it was like I got saved. Some of the sins and struggles and temptations and just battles I faced in general fell away easily. But this one stayed, and it was like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Like
Mm.
now I feel like 10 times worse for doing it because I know it's wrong and I know I need freedom from this and I know I need to stop doing these things. And so there was this whole other level of shame in that area for me of just like
Yeah.
viewing it or like acting upon it or like it just being something conscious in my mind. And it wasn't until I was in college that I truly received like full freedom from it. And it was like you were saying through confessing and through having community and accountability. But for me, like when I was young, there was just so much secrecy and shame to it that
Yep.
even at 14, I was so afraid to be real and honest because I didn't think that anybody else was struggling with it.
Oh
So
yeah. And
I think that's amazing that like you felt that call and conviction and it was like, I really don't care what anybody else thinks because I need to get free from this.
yeah, and I just feel like, at some point you do have to kind of get to the end of the rope where you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I remember
Yeah.
feeling that way. I remember just being so sick of being a hypocrite and living this double life. And it just felt like this weight that I carried with me
Mhm.
everywhere. It's like you think that it's like written on your forehead, like porn addict or I watch
Yeah.
porn, and no one really knows. It's kind of this weird secret sin that no one really has to know, but it does play out in certain ways. And
Mhm.
it's so true though. And I think what's really cool about our stories is that it shows that God can work in different ways of instantly
Mhm.
taking it from you or the daily habits or the daily disciplines where he's sanctifying you and it's a process. And so I do feel like there is hope for both people. But I don't know. I just think even rewinding, like I'm glad that we're having this conversation because when we were younger, this was not a conversation. I talked about that in the
Literally.
beginning of my book, where I also thought, like, I am the only girl, I swear, out of 8 billion plus people in the world, I'm the only
Yep.
girl that struggles with this. And like, that's what the enemy does is he makes you think you're alone. It's only you. So don't tell anybody. Imagine what they'll think if they find out that you're the one girl in the world watching this or you're doing this. And that kept me further enslaved. And so I'm so thankful that you're doing this podcast because I bet there's so many women watching this that are like, wow, I feel so seen for the first time ever.
Yeah, and it wasn't until college, like I said, that I was able to confess, but it was because someone was vulnerable enough to talk about it, of like being stuck in that sin and having experienced freedom from that sin. Because like literally every time I heard it presented was like this is a boy sin.
Right.
Like or at least that's what I was led to believe. Like, oh, girls struggle with gossip and,
Vanity.
eating disorders
Yeah.
and boys struggle with porn and sleeping around and it's like that's just what it is, right? And it's like, well, I feel 10 times worse. I really can't talk to anybody
Mhm.
cuz am I going to go to a boy leader with this? Absolutely not. Like, and I can't even go to my girl leaders because what are they going to think of me? It was just the enemy is so good. Here's something that I write about in the book. Like, I was saved at the time, right? I was 14 years old. I gave my life to Jesus, and I was still struggling with this thing. The enemy could not snatch me from the Lord's hand. He
Mhm.
could not. He still cannot, right? But because he couldn't destroy me, he was doing everything he could to one, isolate me, two, distract me, and three, deceive me. Like he
Wow.
wanted me alone, believing a lie and not seeking out any help from it. And that's exactly what happened. And what happened, like, again, this is an analogy I use in the book, is that when something is like in the dark and festering, it's like a mold. It's toxic and it kills you. But it's when you bring that thing to the light that God can actually take that and mold it and instead make it something that's beautiful. And there's a testimony that comes from that. There's freedom that comes
Mhm.
from that. And it's like you finally see it for what it is and you have the power and the strength because of God and because of his grace and his presence in your life to actually step back from that and flee from that sexual sin. Like it is possible, but it really started with realizing like I have to take a bold step in being vulnerable about this
Mhm.
and not letting this live in the shadows anymore. And it was scary, but I'm thankful for the women that went before me, or literally the girl in my sorority that went before me that confessed that this was something she struggled with because that led to my freedom. And
Mhm.
like this just goes to show, even like if you're listening to this or watching this or however you're consuming this, and God has freed you from any sin. And if he is stirring that up within you and the enemy's trying to shame you from being bold about your victory, like if God is prompting you, like now is the time to share your story about freedom, do it,
Yeah.
because you're going to help other little Kirby's and other little Janines out there that are just living in lies and believing lies. And it's just going to lead to more and more brokenness and shame and sin. And it's like, we help one another as the body by being transparent about what God has delivered us from, and in being transparent about what we need deliverance from, like right here, right
Yeah.
now. Like, we have to link arms and move forward in that if we're going to be free. Freedom isn't just a one person thing. Like, the Lord is in it, and we need one another, community
Amen.
in that process.
Absolutely. I mean, all that is so good. I was just going to say something that, a quote that I often say is that we don't heal in isolation. And so
Mm.
that first step is really realizing, okay, I need to be honest with myself and honest with others and seek out help. And I feel like you find so much freedom in accountability and confession. And it sounds so
Mhm.
scary, but it's like that first initial step is so scary. And then once you do it, watch those chains fall off. Watch the power of that sin break off of you, where it's more scary with the build up to actually confess than actually confessing.
Yeah.
Because like the enemy is like, don't do it, don't do it, don't. And then finally you do it and you're like, oh, it wasn't so
I
bad
can
after
breathe.
all. Yeah. And you can breathe
Yeah.
again. Yeah.
It literally is like a weight that gets lifted off your shoulders. It is
Hmm.
it's a freeing thing. Confession, we were never meant to carry this burden. Like, the burden that Christ gives us is light. He
Yeah.
doesn't want us struggling with sin, being weighed down by our sin, not so he can just like be mad at us and yell at us. Like, he wants freedom for you. He
Hmm.
wants you to live a life of fullness, a life of joy, a life of freedom amidst all the things that go on in life and in the world, right? Like, we're not promised no struggles ever, or we're not even promised that like we'll never face temptation again. We're going to face temptation as
Yep.
believers. And we need to be assured in who Christ has called us to be, and rely on him for those moments of temptation. Because, and I even want to talk about that even for a moment, because it's like, I got delivered from that, right? I walked out freedom from it. It was a process. And again, you can get my book to read even more about just like what that journey looks like, because it is a journey. But I still faced temptation
Yeah.
where it was like, oh, I could so easily satisfy my flesh right now. I could so easily go to this website, do this thing, like, this insatiable desire within me, just like, turn down the noise and just be like, have it be done and over with. But it's like, temptation is a battle. It is a war. It is hard, but it's something that we can overcome. So I don't know if you have any encouragement maybe for people who are like, I want to be free. I'm in the process of walking out freedom in this area. Did you ever face temptation of any kind, and maybe fail and fall in it, but also see victory from it? And what did that look like to walk out and face just temptation?
Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right that, there's no guarantee that we will not face temptations again. I mean, you may, get rid of one lust or one desire or one sin, and then another one comes. And so
Yeah.
really the goal is not to just get rid of it, but it's to actually practice the fruit of the spirit, which is
Mm.
self-control. And so that's how you can overcome these things, I feel like, is
Mhm.
by practicing the self-control, by abiding in Jesus. And the more you spend time with him, the further you get away from sin. And so I don't feel like there's an absolute solution to get rid of temptations, because they're always going to come. I mean, Jesus was literally
Yeah.
tempted. And so, yeah, for me, different temptations popped up. It was like I didn't have necessarily the strong desire to watch it again. It would come back up every now and then. So even though you might hear my story and you're like, wow, God took away that sin from her, it doesn't mean that it didn't come back. Like, I still would every now and then be like, oh, I wonder what it would be like. But this time I had the tools to fight back and be like, no, I'm not going to go back to it. And then my
Mhm.
sins looked different. It's different sins in different seasons, I feel like. And so sometimes it would be gossip. Sometimes it would be the temptation to, masturbate. It would be a temptation to do other things, to get on a dating app. And so it's weird how you can solve one and get rid of it, and the enemy immediately throws another one. Or it may be,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, now I want you to start, looking for approval from men. And that's like your next thing. And so really my goal is to help people deal with the actual like root of like what's actually going on. There's like a hole that we're trying to fill in all the wrong
Mm-hmm.
places. And so how can we abide in the Lord and know him and know his word and let him be kind of really where we find that true healing, that we're not going to other places to find all these cravings and desires and satisfactions in all the wrong places.
100%. The enemy is like, nothing is new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about I believe it's in First John, it talks about how um, the enemy will use what is it? The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh,
Yeah.
and the pride of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to like, that is his schemes. Like, is one of those three things when you really break down and boil down like what sin it is that you're struggling with, whether it's this one or literally any other one, it can fit into those three categories. And what's so interesting is that when we look at Genesis and it talks about when Eve saw the fruit, she saw the fruit, the lust of the eyes, and she saw it was good for food, lust of the flesh, and that it would make her wise, the pride of life. Like, boom, you literally have all three at the very beginning of the Bible. Like,
That's a bar
it's
right there. Yep.
Like, it's literally nothing is new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so important to know, is that one, that's how the enemy be working. Like, we need to understand that. So whenever he is throwing any sin our way, it's like, okay, is this appealing to, like, you know, my eyes and my desires, or my flesh and what can just like instantly satisfy me, or my pride and my ego and all these things? It's like, we have to break it down and realize that one, he's crafty, he's cunning, like, I'll give him that, but not crafty enough, because we literally know how he works. And I have a whole chapter in my book called Exposing the Enemy. Like, it's just
That's
like,
so
y'all want to
good.
know literally everything about Satan so you can see through every scheme he has. Like, you can read that. And then the following chapter is about, like, we need to know who God is. Like, we need to know our enemy, and we also need to know the Lord. I think those are two key things when facing temptation. Is I know my enemy, so I can see like what flaming darts he's throwing at me. I can see it from a mile away. And I also know my own areas of temptation, like where I'm susceptible, like where I need extra armor, or where I need people to cover me in prayer, or where I literally just need the Lord to be my refuge because my armor is not strong enough right now.
Yeah.
And we need to know our God and know the truth and know everything that he empowers us with, because truly at the end of the day, I love that you brought up the fruit of the Spirit, because it's the fruit of the Spirit. He produces those things in us when we abide in him, just like you said. And it's so cool. You have this awesome ministry thing that you do called Abide Tribe, and y'all need to go check that out, ladies. But when the Holy Spirit is evident and at work in your life, and you just allow him to come in and take control and do what he needs to do, clean up what he needs to clean up, he will plant seeds in your heart. And through disciplines, we water those seeds, but he produces the fruit. And one of those fruits is self-control. So it's not just on us alone to resist these things. Temptation is hard. Like, are we great at resisting? Not all the time. Like, I'll be honest about that. But when I know God's truth and I know the enemy's schemes, I can rely on the Lord to get me through it when I just can't take another dart, when I can't take another attack.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say that's so good, Kirby. I mean, knowing those three things is so key, and I also think it's so important with these addictions and with any temptation is to know your triggers, like know what causes you to feel that way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's loneliness, sometimes it's boredom, sometimes it's hunger, sometimes you're just tired. And so knowing even like our own personal weaknesses, physical weaknesses, that those can sometimes be areas that we're more susceptible to fall into temptation. For me, I know I cannot watch certain Netflix shows because it's not good for me. It's not good for me to see that and make my eyes cause to wander and do all sorts of crazy things. And so it's important to know your triggers for any addiction that you have. I mean, there's so many different triggers for each sin. And so know those and be able to tell someone about that, because I think what's really, really hard about the addiction with pornography is that, Pastor JP, Jonathan Bacluta, talks about this all the time. we carry
Mhm.
it in our pockets. Like our
Literally.
phones make it so accessible. It is one click away. And so that might look like getting covenant eyes. That might look like having someone where they track your phone and they see the moves that you do on your phone and it sends someone's alerts, because you cannot face the temptation on your own. And so removing
Mhm.
the temptations and knowing your triggers is going to be so important. Like, just for example, for me, a tangible one of this or practical example would be I'm trying to cut back on sugar. So if I'm trying to cut back on sugar, I cannot have sugar in my house. Like I can't have the very thing
Mhm.
tempting me that's causing me to sin in my house. And so I've got to get rid of the cookies, get rid of the candy, and be mindful that okay, if it's in my pantry, it's literally in the house that I live in, I'm going to be
Yep.
tempted because it's in proximity of me. And so just be careful and know your triggers and know that those are the areas closest to you that are going to cause you to be tempted the most.
It reminds me of that one verse in scripture where, and I write about this in the book, obviously, because all this is like in scripture and I'm referencing that, of how, like, if your arm is causing you to sin, cut that thing off.
Hmm.
Like, if your eye is causing you to sin, gouge that thing out. And no, this is not literal.
Yeah.
Don't do that to
Figuratively.
your body. Figuratively. Um, because what it is saying, like, and it talks about if your leg is causing you to stumble, cut it off. And it's like, okay, our eye, our arm, and our leg. It's like, well, what am I looking at that I should not be looking at? What am I reaching for that shouldn't even be within arm's reach? Like, what am I wandering towards that shouldn't even be in my path? It's like
Mhm.
we really need to look at the deeper meaning of what Jesus is saying here and what scripture is saying here, because it's like, if that thing is accessible in your life, that is where the line in the sand needs to be drawn. Like,
Yeah.
temptation, something that my friend Atika, she's incredible. My friend Atika said on Instagram forever ago, or TikTok forever ago, is like, the boundary doesn't need to be like, for example, like if you're sleeping with your boyfriend or your girlfriend or whoever right now, the boundary shouldn't be having sex with them outside of marriage. Like the boundary needs to be like all the way back here, like
Right.
spending time with them past 10 p.m. And it's like, that's the boundary. Like,
Right.
so it's like if you were to stumble over that boundary, you're not in the worst area of consequence. Like, and then I talk about boundaries a lot in my book and how to set them up, how to identify them, practically what that looks like to implement it. But I like what you said with sugar being in the house. It's like if you get that thing out the house, it's not within arm's reach. It's not
Yeah.
just a walk away. You can't just like see it on the counter over there. So it's like that's such a good practical, because it's also biblical. It's
Yeah.
something that anyone can tangibly do and apply it to whatever sin that they're stuck in.
And I mean, you will face withdrawals. Like, don't get me wrong. You're gonna
Yep.
face some withdrawals, and I think what's really cool, and I'm excited for your book because I feel like it's showing how to partner with God in overcoming these temptations. I think a lot of
Mhm.
people, they're expecting God to come 100% and they're not willing to even go 50. They're just like sitting there with the sin festering and they're like, God, remove the sin from me. Remove the sin. Please, Lord, just take the sin. And they're not even willing to make the steps to get rid of it. Like you're just expecting God to
Mhm.
do all the work for you, but you've got to be so sick and tired of it and get rid of it and partner with him. And so I'm excited to read what your book has to say about that. I'm sure it will talk about that. Of like sometimes we got to also work with God in our temptations. And sometimes he doesn't take them
Mhm.
from us because he wants us to build that muscle of discipline and self-control.
100%. Sometimes he delivers you instantaneously from an addiction, a struggle, a sin. And other times it's like, I'm actually going to teach you a deeper lesson through this, my character through this, develop your character through this.
Right.
So just don't be discouraged if you are in that pit right now of muck and mire and you feel stuck and you're tired and you just can't seem to get free on your own. Like, the Lord is waiting for each and every single one of us to have that Peter moment where it's like, okay, are you done taking your eyes off of me and drowning?
Mm,
Like, literally lift up your hand to me. I will pull you out of this things. But you got to lift your hand. You got to say, God, like, I'm going to partner with you. Like, I need your help to pull me out of this pit. And
mhm.
exactly, there's going to be work
Surrender.
to do. Surrender. There's going to be work to do. There's going to be struggle and strife, and that really sucks, especially if were put in that place unwillingly. Like, I
Yeah.
was exposed to it at a young age and I hated myself for so long because of it, but it's like, honestly, I need to have a little bit of grace for myself because I was never meant to see those things. So it's like, number one, stop hating yourself. Number two, see yourself how God sees you. Literally reach out to him and start doing the work of setting up those boundaries in your life, but also understanding the enemy and the Lord and the truth and who you are in him and all these things. And if you just want one resource that talks about it all, you can get the book. But
me with my
most
book.
importantly,
Like,
no, literally,
plugging it every 2 seconds. I'm like, guys, trust
literally,
me. Buy it.
please. Yes. Also, if you guys didn't see the episode with Jeanine where we talk about her book, y'all got to listen to that because that one's really, really good. I'll link it down below for this. But y'all, it is a journey. It requires work. But the good news is that freedom is possible.
And
freedom
there's hope.
is possible.
There is hope
There
for your
is
situation.
100%. Well, Jeanine, thank you for joining me on the pod and just being open and vulnerable about this. And it really is the best to actually be open and vulnerable because it's like, I have freedom in this. Like, there is no shame. There is no condemnation.
Power.
That.
Yeah.
100%.
And it's so crazy. I'm sure there's people listening and they're like, I will never confess or admit that that's my struggle. And I swear the more you do it, the less power it has, the easier it is to say. And it's so cool when the enemy tries to get you to shut your mouth and you're like, nope. And I mean, I have an entire chapter about that too, all about secrets. Cause I'm like, truly, God wants to use your story for his glory. You have the key to someone else's freedom. And so that's why Kirby and I can come on this podcast and be so bold and unapologetic about it because the Lord has set us free and it's no longer, we're no longer a slave to that anymore. And thirdly, we want to help other people find freedom from the very things that we overcame.
Well, y'all go check out Jeanine. Jeanine, where can everybody check you out and everything that you're doing?
I love that. Thank you. Well, my podcast is Happy and Healthy and my name is Jeanine Amapola, now Ward. I just got married like 4 months ago. So Jeanine Amapola, and I also have a book called Becoming Happy and Healthy, and it's practical biblical advice for all the things you guys are struggling with as well. But definitely check out Kirby's book. It's going to be so amazing.
Thank you. I'm so excited for it to come out, y'all. And like I said, if you pre-order it now, there's so many freebies that I have. You can get the 5-day devotional that goes with it. You can get the battle plan worksheet so you can actually like strategically understand the areas where you are struggling with sin and how to take steps to get free. Like you said, making those choices of right now, like where am I going to draw the line in the sand? Where are my boundaries? All those things. You can get the foreword, which was written by Hosanna Wong, one of my favorite people ever. Aww. You get access to reading that as well as the first 2 chapters for free and a bonus chapter that got cut because I literally wrote like 15,000 extra words and I was like, this is good stuff. I want people to have it. So pre-order it. I'm also doing a webinar that y'all can sign up for where we're going to be talking about freedom from sin and also freedom from shame because those 2 things go hand in hand and we don't need to struggle with either. The Lord has brought us freedom. So sign up for that when you pre-order the book and I can't wait for y'all to get it. And I'm so excited for the rest of this series to keep on going, to keep on talking about freedom. So Jeanine, again, thank you for being on the pod today. Love you. Y'all go check out her stuff. And I will see you next week for another episode here on the Bought and Beloved podcast. Bye.